During the second part of the 16th century, many people believed that the expansion of the Ottoman Empire cannot be stopped. But even so, during the Battle of Lepanto in 1571, the Christian forces and the Christian armada managed to score a decisive victory against the Ottoman fleet. Hello, this is Michel Leviathan Sorbet, and this is a new episode of Wojennik TV. Today I'd like to invite you to a new review of a game which I have already showed on Wojennik TV during a Polish unboxing and during a Polish review. This will be the English version of this review of Lepanto 1571, A Sea Turned Red by Blood. This wargame was published by Acies Edizioni in 2021 and it was designed by Enrico Acerbi. The game was released as a title for 1 to 6 players. The time of play is somewhere around 4 to 6 hours depending on the scenario chosen, and the minimum age of the player is 14 years or higher. This is obviously a wargame which enables us to recreate the epic Battle of Lepanto 1571, during which the Christian combined fleet, in which we had Genoese, Venetian, Papal and Spanish units, managed to score a decisive victory against a combined Ottoman fleet. The result was the stopping of the expansion of the Ottoman forces in the Mediterranean. So often it is considered as one of the turning points of the wars fought between the Western Christian allies and the Ottoman Empire. The game, as I said a few moments ago, is for 1 to 6 players because we will be having more than one map. We can play a big game recreating the whole Battle of Lepanto using not less than 3 big paper maps, or we can play also a smaller game in which, for instance, we will recreate only the southern clash, the central or the northern part of the battle. So this is a game in which we can both play as a 2 players game as well as a team play, or we can play a game in which one player takes control, for instance, of the whole Ottoman forces and the Christians are divided the forces, for instance, into the northern, central and southern sector. It's up to the players. So this is a thing which enables us some flexibility when it comes to the way that we want to play this game. Today I'd like to show you how this game looks. Then I'd like to briefly explain what are its key mechanics, and at the end of the review I'd like to give you my final thoughts concerning Lepanto. So let's begin by taking a look at the elements of this game. Here is a look at Lepanto, A Sea Turned Red by Blood by Acies Edizioni. This is a game for 2 players in which one of the players will take control of the Christian forces, whereas the second one will take control of the Ottoman forces. Both will clash during an epic struggle on the sea surrounding Lepanto. The game comes with 3 very big paper maps which allow us to recreate all the battle, but it is also possible to play smaller scale scenarios. Here what you can see is the northern map, which allows us to recreate the struggle between the northern flotillas of both sides. The second map represents the central sector, whereas the third one enables us to recreate the battle at the southern flank, although, as I said a few moments ago, it is also absolutely possible to link all those maps and to recreate the whole big battle of Lepanto using all the counters and all the forces that both sides had during the battle. Each map, as you can see, is a map with an hexagonal grid on it, with each hex numbered, with some subtle differences concerning types of types of sea, because we do have shallow water somewhere near the coastline. This in a small way impacts units movement, but in general most of the playing area will be plain open sea, where each unit can act absolutely the same way. On each map we have also a turn record track on which we will be tracking time. We have also additional tracks alongside the map. As you can see here, we have the ramming track, which is used by both players to resolve ramming attacks. As you can see, we have counters which can be used on this track. Additionally, in order to play, we will be using an additional chart on which we will track information about the current state of the wings of each side in a given sector, indicating their efficiency both in terms of movement and firepower. When units are lost, when wings take losses, those levels can be diminished and they are tracked on those tracks, one for each side. So having a lot of units lost or maybe taken increases the difficulty of maneuvering the flotilla as a whole and also decreases its firepower. When choosing the scenario, apart from the maps, we will choose, of course, and be using units. And in general, in Lepanto, we have two kinds of counters. Firstly, we have the additional counters which are used in order to track different information, to track different events, to track different statuses. For instance, we have counters used to indicate ramming units. We have also counters indicating the sailing mode, which is used as an optional rule. We have fire aboard counters. We have additional ones indicating units who has their masts down, etc. The second type of counters are, of course, the unit counters. And in Lepanto, we have three types of units. Of course, all of them are naval units. The first kind of unit is a flotilla unit, which in general will be a galley, or rather galleys. As you can see, each such a counter has its own emblem indicating the unit of which it is a part of, and only two information: the handling value and the firepower value. Those counters are double-sided. On the second side we have the same handling value and a reduced firepower, because each unit, when using their artillery attack, is flipped over. A unit can attack only once per turn, and in order to attack once more it has to reload its guns. Those units have a facing, they have a front and a back, which is indicated by the silhouette of the ships printed on the counter, because facing, as in most naval games, is quite important. The second type of naval unit is a single ship unit, for instance a lanterna, which, as you can see, depicts only one ship, which has all the same two additional stats. The difference between those two is the fact that some rules are applied only to single ships, and additionally the leaders, which are admirals, which are captains, can be stacked only on single ships at the game's start. Then, when both sides take losses, it is possible to transfer those captains or admirals to your flotillas, but at the game start you do have to assign those captains to single ships. Finally, the third type of units are the very powerful Venetian galleasses. So those are big, very big ships, which are the slowest ones, which sometimes have also a decreased firepower, but they do have some bonuses. Their arc of fire is constituted of all the six hexes around such a unit, which is the biggest advantage of such units. Additionally, they work in a little bit different way when it comes to certain attack types. So those are the unit types which are used. As you can see on the maps, we have an information on certain hexes, which units start the game on which hex. This is in contrast to many games in which we have a description telling us that a given unit starts the game on, for instance, hex 20 to 19. Here it is already printed, which is an extremely good idea because it enables us to set up more quickly. Now, the game is played using the cheat pool mechanic. So the last type of counters which we will be using are the cheats. And here again, two types of cheats. The first type is related to all the units which are in the game, and on such a cheat we have the name and the colors of the given flotilla, which can be activated when such a cheat is pulled from the cap. So for instance, when drawing the Barbarigo cheat, all the units which are part of the Barbarigo flotilla can be activated. So all those units here in the northern sector can be activated thanks to this cheat. Now, when a flotilla is being activated, all units which are part of such a flotilla can make three different kinds of things in a very specific order. Firstly, we can move a unit, then we can attack with it, and finally we can try to make some repairs. Each unit is activated separately, although it is possible to move stacks also, but in general you should activate one and only one unit, move it, attack with it, try repairs, and then pass to the next unit inside your flotilla. So units cannot attack together. We cannot also move each unit and then launch attacks. We do have to move a unit and then attack with it directly after its movement. This is due to the fact that some attacks, some ways of attacking are strictly related to movement. So when it comes to this movement, each unit type has a certain mobility, which depends on the unit type, which depends also on the moving mode, and finally, which can depend on the wind direction. When it comes to wind and sailing modes, those are optional rules, which enable us to use also sailing movement with sails and using wind. Normally, if we do not use the optional wind rule, wind will always blow from one side to another during the entire game, but using this optional rule, wind can blow from different directions if it changes. Now, as you can see, we have two tables. One is used when a unit uses its sails, the second one when it uses its rows. And as you can see, the movement factors are different depending on the type of movement, and also depend on if we move downwind or into the wind in both cases. When it comes to movement, nothing very complicated. As you might expect, facing is important. Changing facing requires spending points. Sometimes if moving into the wind, we do have to make some handling checks, which are resolved in a very simple way. We roll a die, we compare the result to the handling value of the counter trying to make such a maneuver. If the result is equal or lower, it is successfully resolved, otherwise it fails. So in movement, nothing very exceptional. After movement, we have the possibility to launch an attack with the unit which was moved. And here we have three types of attacks. The first one is an artillery attack using the firepower printed on the unit. Of course, if a unit already used its guns during a given turn, it cannot shoot once more. When attacking, you have to place your counter on a hex which is next to the counter which we want to attack. So no range bigger than one hex. We can attack only adjacent hex, but the type of hex which can be attacked depends on the type of unit which is shooting. So galleys can attack only the front hex directly in front of the galley. Single ships, for instance the lanternas, can attack both the front and back hex from its own hex. Finally, the powerful galleasses can attack each and every hex which is around them, and additionally, if they attack broadside, so to the sides, their firepower is doubled. If we have an enemy unit which can be attacked in such a way, we compare the firepower of the shooting unit to the handling value of the defending unit. We obtain a certain result. Then we use some additional modifiers, and we use the combat resolution table, which is printed on one of the player aids. Here it is. It's player aid C, where we have the artillery fire procedure. After determining the final firepower, obtaining a column, we roll a die and we verify the result. And here the results can be, for instance, mast down, which indicates that the target ship has its mast down, which implies some restrictions concerning movement. The unit can also be put on fire, and it can also acquire some, it can also be assigned, it can also have some hits assigned to it, which are resolved in accordance to an over table. Now those hits can influence, can make a unit flee from the battlefield, it can make it disappear for a few turns and then return, it can surrender, it can be also sunk. If a unit is sunk or surrenders, we indicate it on the corresponding track in order to see if the firepower or maneuverability of our flotilla was diminished because of such a fact. So after using our artillery attacks, a unit is flipped over and it has to reload its guns. There is also the possibility to fire in reaction to an opponent's movement. In such a case, we will also use our artillery attack and our counter will be flipped over, which means that when our activation comes, we won't be able to attack once more. But we have two different types of attacks also. The first one are ramming attacks, which require our unit to enter the hex where the opposing unit is present and still have movement points available. When we do, we can initiate a ramming attack. Both units are transferred to the ramming track, and here, in accordance to some procedural points, we will verify if the ramming ship manages to score a hit, so to traverse all this track and reach the target ship in order to strike it. We verify what is the effect, and here again we can have different effects, resulting even in sinking the enemy vessel. Finally, we have also boarding attacks, which are initiated due to grappling enemy ships. Grappling can be automatic after a successful ramming, or we can initiate grappling as a separate type of attack. If this happens, both units become grappled, they are linked together, and they will await the moment when a special cheat is drawn from the cheats pool, the special boarding counter. Because as I said earlier, we have two kinds of cheats in the pool. We have activation counters and special tokens, which can, for instance, cause a check of the direction of the wind, which can enable us to activate entire groups, which can enable us to extinguish fires, and which also trigger boarding attacks. If such a cheat is drawn, each and every unit which is linked with an over one due to previous grappling can resolve a hand-to-hand combat. Both units will try to seize the other, and after such a combat, both units, one of the units can become taken by the opponent, or maybe sometimes such a battle can be inconclusive, and again, after drawing an overboarding cheat, the fight might restart over. So after resolving all the attacks, we have a small segment where units can try to repair the masts, and then when all cheats are drawn from the pool, when it is already empty, we replace all the cheats inside the pool and we restart a new game, a new turn. In the end, a game of Lepanto ends when the turn record track, when the counter on the turn record track reaches the last space, and at that point we will be counting the points. Because Lepanto is resolved, the outcome of the battle is resolved by verifying the number of victory points accumulated by the Christian player. So at the game's end, as you can see, we will count the number of points gained and lost by the Christian player, and if the total of victory points is a negative number, the Ottoman player wins. If the total of victory points is between 0 to 20, the game is drawn, and finally, if the Christian player has 21 or more points, he scores a win. So at the end, as you can see, it's the Christian points which will be relevant. And those points are scored for sinking enemy vessels, for reducing the level of enemy flotillas to a certain number, and of course we lose points for losing our own vessels and for forces which caused us to reduce the levels of our flotillas. So those are in general all the basic rules of Lepanto 1571. There are some over rules, for instance, very specific rules governing certain vessels. We have those optional rules governing sailing, governing wind. We have some specific rules governing grappling, ramming. But now I'd like to invite you to the final part of this video, when I'd like to tell you what I liked in Lepanto 1571, what I liked less, and what I think in general about this game. So let's pass to this part of the video. Lepanto 1571 is a game that I really wanted to try because I like the theme, I like the topic of the game. The Battle of Lepanto was an extremely important one, which in some way stopped the Ottoman thrust on the Mediterranean, and it enabled the Christian kingdoms of Western Europe to stop the Ottoman expansion. So from this point of view, this was an important battle. And important battles are things which very often are used in wargaming, but not Lepanto 1571. We do have some war games covering this interesting battle, but not a lot of them. And even if we take a look at our Facebook groups or our wargaming topics on BoardGameGeek, we do not see a lot of comments concerning this battle or games which are covering this event. So it's nice to see a new game which in a high detail level enables us to recreate this battle. When looking for strong points of Lepanto 1571 by Acies Edizioni, I'd say that the first strong point, I think, which deserves a thumb up, is the fact that we see that both the designer and the editorial team made a lot of effort to make a game which enables us to recreate the whole battle in detail. I know that this game was released a few years earlier, but still the work done in order to put a lot of chrome in it to create a very detailed order of battle was immense. And it is an important factor because each time I play a war game, I discover a new war game, I always take a very close look at the historical notes, at the additional educational value of such a title. And in the case of Lepanto 1571, we do have a lot of interesting information included. We have the separate playbook in which we have a detailed explanation of the background which led to the Battle of Lepanto, a very detailed description of the battle itself and of its outcome. We have an extremely detailed order of battle. We have extremely interesting information added also in the rulebook or in the playbook concerning the whole background and the way to wage war at that time. This was one of the last battles in which we had two clashes. We had two forces clashing, not in a naval battle as we know it contemporary or as it was then in, for instance, the 18th, the 19th century. It was still somewhat of a land battle on sea because both forces tried in general to approach their opponents and to bring their troops onto enemy vessels. So grappling, so ramming were very important tactics. Then it deteriorated and then new tactics were used. Sailing vessels with big firepower were the way to go. So from this point of view, it's also a nice educational product which enables us to better understand how the Battle of Lepanto looked like. I like games in which which tell us a story. I like games which enable us to better understand how the battle depicted went. So from this point of view, I think Lepanto 1571 is a nice study of the battle. It enables us to better understand how it went. It enables us also to, looking at the board, understand why the battle ended in such a way. Secondly, I think that a strong point of this game, which also deserves a thumb up, is the way how some rules were incorporated into the game, which are related to the theme. So the relation between the mechanics of the game and the theme are quite good. We have, as I said earlier, mechanics concerning grappling, we have mechanics concerning ramming, and both are quite easy to implement, at the same time quite thematic and quite dynamic and interesting. We have some other mechanics concerning, for instance, using sails. We have the powerful Christian galleys, which are galleons, which are the most intriguing vessels during the entire battle. So we do have some details concerning this battle, a lot of chrome included, even though the rules are quite straightforward. So this is also a nice thing, because the game is not overly complicated. At the same time, it has in it some small tweaks, some small details, which make us feel the climate of the battle and feel the intensity of the combats. When we speak of intensity, the game is really quite intense, because the game starts with both sides at a certain distance, but then when this distance diminishes, when both sides enter in contact distance, the game becomes extremely intense and quite chaotic, because vessels will shoot one another at another. They will try to ram their opponents. They will try grappling. Units will become entangled. We will have boarding parties. We will have several activations. And the mix of the counters on the map becomes extremely chaotic. So the game is really intense, and the mechanics used also enable you to recreate this dynamics of those very bloody encounters, which were elements of maritime warfare in the 16th century. What I really enjoy is the fact that the elements that we receive in the game are of a high quality. I really like the artwork on the counters. I really like also the maps, although they are quite easy to design, because those are naval encounters, so the maps will be quite straightforward. We still do have the additional tracks, which are extremely useful. I like the fact that we have those tracks on each and every 3 of the maps. This is absolutely a good idea to include them on each and every map. When we speak of the number of maps, it is a good idea to include several scenarios, both a big scenario enabling us to recreate the whole Lepanto battle. It's still possible. Secondly, we can play smaller engagements using 1 or 2 maps. For instance, we can play only the southern sector battle, simulating only the clashes which occurred at the southern part of each force. So we do not have to play the whole battle, which really takes a lot of time, and additionally it requires us to have a lot of space, because those maps are really big maps, and we can play a smaller scale battle, still enjoying it a lot, still having all those elements which we have in the big battle if we decide to play the whole engagement. So what, in my opinion, are the weaker points of Lepanto 1571? I'd say there are a few things. The first one, which is to some point related to the previous game, which I have already reviewed on Wojennik TV, which was released by Acies Edizioni, that was Durchbruch. This problem remains pretty much the same. It's the language used both in the rulebook and in the playbook. Unfortunately, we can see that this is not those were not documents prepared by someone for whom English is its mother's tongue. I know that both documents were verified, they were read by Andy Logs, but still with such a correction, those documents are not well written. Especially the playbook, in which we have absolutely bizarre constructions, in which we have different bizarre phrases. We evidently see that this document was written by people who really enjoy what they do, who really know a lot of things about what they are writing, but still written in such a way that this is not perfect English. It's far from being perfect. My English is not perfect, but if I were to release a game, a written game in which I have a text which will be released, which will be published, presented to an audience, I would do my best to give it to read to native speakers in order to polish it, in order to present a text which is to the biggest extent which is nearest to the perfect English text that I would be able to create. Here I believe that this correction was not fully done, or if it was done, it wasn't done enough. I believe it is something that Acies Edizioni should definitely take a look at when releasing new games. Sadly also, the rules contain some blank spots or some very bizarre mechanical ideas. And here we have some ambiguities in the rules, we have some things which we or have to guess, or we have to rule some things. For instance, when we use the optional rules which enable us to use sailing mode, we do not know what to do if we start the turn in sailing mode, and if we decide to then change the moving mode to rowing, can we use the full amount of movement points that we had at the start of the activation, or changing the mode requires us to reduce the number of movement points that we can use? Do the Genoese galleys can turn only at the start of their movement, or can they, for instance, move to hexes and then turn, expanding their full movement capacity? There are some small elements which aren't explained in a way which would give us all the answers. I know that Acies Edizioni, the designer, the staff of Acies Edizioni is extremely active on BoardGameGeek, so it is still possible to obtain those answers contacting the designer or Acies Edizioni directly, or posting a question on BoardGameGeek. But I still believe that the rules aren't perfect, or are far from being perfect. I said that there are some bizarre mechanics, and here I had some doubts concerning many mechanics, but one was a thing which really made my eyebrows rise. It's the mechanic concerning units fleeing away the battlefield. Now, this mechanic sometimes is used in other war games. In general, in this game, when a unit receives the flee away result, we take it from the map and we put it on the turn record track. It re-enters the game after 2 turns. So if I have this ambiguous situation on the board and a clash between 2 ships in the middle of the board, surrounded by several other units, if one of the units receives the flee away result, we take it and we put it directly onto the turn record track. We absolutely do not take into consideration where this clash took place. If this escaping unit can safely pass through an enormous number of enemy vessels, it doesn't matter. This is worse, even if this unit is grappled and it is attached to our own vessel, if another of our vessels shoots at this very precise ship, this ship can still obtain the flee away result, and it is teleported to the turn record track, even being entangled, even being ready to be boarded by our boarding party from the ship which is next to it. I think this is illogical. I think this is bizarre, and from the from the thematic point of view, this just doesn't make any sense. So there are some small things which make me wonder how some mechanics work. I said that the mechanics are well linked to the theme, and I still believe they are, but some small things makes things bizarre and makes you wonder if it is really that thematic that you believed at the start. There is a problem with the player aids, with the player aid charts, because we have 4 or 5 player aid charts, but they are prepared in such a way that they aren't very useful. I'd really love to obtain 1 or maybe 2 player aid charts on which I have absolutely everything. Player aid sheets on which I have absolutely everything. When you take a look at those player aid sheets, you see that you have, for instance, only 2 tables on those, or 2 charts on those sheets, and you have to constantly look at other sheets, searching for the one that you need in the given time. I'd prefer to obtain 1 sheet with a lot of tables, with a lot of information, and I could take a look at this sheet instantly and find the information that I want. Here it's not very helpful because constantly I had to change the sheets, I had to search for the information. I know that they are quite pretty, we have quite thematic, quite climatic pictures on them, but I do not think that this is an interesting addition to the game. I prefer to obtain elements which help me to play the game than to increase its theme additionally. I have enough theme in the elements, in the playbook, on the map board itself, on the counters. I want the elements, the player aids to help me, to aid me to play the game. Here I had some doubts. Additionally, those charts aren't very logical at times. For instance, in the charts where we have the different movement modes, we have the sailing mode and the rowing mode, we have in the first column information concerning our movement abilities if we are moving into the wind, but at the bottom table we start by a column which says us what is the number of movement points if we move downwind. So it is not in the same place in both tables. Why? I do not know, but this is all again a small thing which doesn't additionally help. The last thing which can be problematic in Lepanto 1571 is the fact that even though stacking is not permitted at most times in the game, you can stack some units because it depends on the unit type, but in general you won't be stacking units. At some point during the game you will still have a lot of stacks on the board, and due to the chaotic nature of the battle, it will be difficult to find your own units. All formations are distinguishable by the small colored ribbon on them, which enables you to see to which formation such a unit belongs. But when those units are covered by other counters, which for instance are placed due to must down statuses, due to grappling, due to ramming, sometimes opposing units will be on the same hex. If you have some captains on your vessels, it becomes quite clumsy. You have a lot of counter stacking and you will have sometimes problems seeing if this unit is a Christian unit or an Ottoman unit and to which unit it belongs. So when you draw your activation sheet, firstly, you will have to spend some time in order to search for your units and see what can be activated. Because when the game evolves, units will move along the board, they will change place, and being part of such a formation will be relevant only when it comes to the cheat pulled from the container. This won't have an impact, for instance, on combat efficiency. So you can have a unit close to its formation leader, which will be as efficient as a unit which is 15 hexes away. I don't think this is quite logical, although I understand that in the chaos of the battle, it's up to the vessel's captain to take full control, to take full responsibility of your crew's, of your ship's actions. Okay, but then why to separate those formations and activate them separately? I understand that this is due to the mechanic of cheat pulling, of pulling cheats and activating only partial parts of your fleet. But still, having those captains, having those formation leaders would maybe require adding some additional rules, enabling you to obtain some benefits, or maybe having some maluses due to the fact that you are somewhere far away from your formation. Lepanto's 1571 lacks those rules. Additionally, those colored bands which enable us to differentiate units, or the small shields or emblems which are at the bottom of the counter, aren't that helpful, because sometimes you will still wonder if the unit that you are looking for is a Christian unit or a Ottoman unit. Of course, there are some subtle differences between the units, but still you will have to spend some time looking at those units and searching for those that can be activated. So it again adds a little bit of time to a game which is long, which is quite engaging, and which, using all the mechanics, including the optional rules which are in the game, can drag for 4 or 5 hours, even playing the smaller engagement battle. So, concluding, Lepanto 1571 is without any doubt an interesting project, an interesting game about an extremely interesting battle. A game which has a lot of educational value, a game which has a lot of historical flavor, which has an interesting theme and some interesting mechanics which enable you to recreate the way how naval battles were fought in the second part of the 16th century. A game which has beautiful components, which also can be played in a group from 1 to 6 players, and in which you can choose the scenario from a variety of scenarios, both a shorter or a very long scenario, which enable you to recreate all the Battle of Lepanto. At the same time, this is a game which has some rule problems, which has some bizarre mechanics, which at the same time isn't extremely good in terms of its flow, in which sometimes you will be wondering if those mechanics, which at first glance seem to be interesting, thematic, are very well incorporated to the game. A game in which sometimes the chaotic situation on the map will make you waste some time in order to search for a given unit or to see its status, in which stacking might be problematic. A game still interesting to discover because, as I said earlier, it has a huge potential. It is quite engaging, it is quite dynamic, but if you want to play it, I fully recommend you consult the questions and the answers which were given on BoardGameGeek or on other medias, for instance on Consim World, or if you want to fully enjoy it, you will still have to take into consideration making some smaller tweaks in the rules. If you do, and if you like the naval theme and the subject of the game, I think that Lepanto 1571 might be an interesting choice. This was the review of Lepanto 1571, A Sea Turned Red by Blood, designed by Enrico Acerbi and published by Acies Edizioni. Thank you a lot for watching this video. I invite you also to our other videos. We have also some interesting information on Facebook and on Instagram. Have a terrific day and see you next time.